Welcome to Discipleship Dialogues with Ascending Leaders. Ready for transformation in your church? We're here to help you get measurable results and eternal outcomes. Join us as we uncover the vital, often missed concepts that will help you build a vibrant, Christ-centered discipleship culture.
Welcome to our Discipleship Dialogue today. I'm Teresa Rossi. I serve on staff at Chapelwood United Methodist Church for nearly 25 years in the role of Director of Adult Discipleship. And the last 2 years, I've volunteered as the chair of our board of the Ascending Leaders organization, which Mike Johnson, who is our guest today on the program, founded 20 years ago. The Reverend Dr. Mike Johnson is also serving as the executive director of Ascending Leaders and as the senior discipleship coach on our team of discipleship coaches that work with churches all over the country and across the globe. We are thrilled to have you with us today, Mike, and I wanted to point out that Mike's experience also includes a pastor. He planted a church in Missouri City, Texas, and pastored that church for a number of years. He has a doctorate degree in discipleship, and he has served as a consultant with many churches through the years. I'm excited to hear from him today about our topic, which is what is the importance of using a church-wide discipleship assessment when working with a church. So Mike, thank you so much for being with us and for talking with us about the tools that churches can use as they enter into a coaching relationship with ascending leaders.
Thank you, Teresa. It's great to be here and to dialogue around something that's really important for the local church.
So you start with an assessment. Could you tell us what that means? I know that Ascending Leaders values our mission of equipping churches for Christ-centered discipleship. And part of what we bring is measurable results with eternal outcomes. So how does using a church-wide discipleship assessment play into creating measurable results for a church?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. Part of our mission is churches. We are very focused on the local church, and we coach churches. But in that, coaching them for Christ-centered discipleship, equipping them for Christ-centered discipleship, measurable results can be really important, really helpful. And we use a church-wide discipleship assessment. And what that is something that you have as many of your churchgoers as you can take over a period of 3 weeks. And it really asks them a lot of questions about their life as a disciple and how they're growing and where they're not growing. And then you take all those results from people, you pull it together into a report for the church that tells the church what they're doing well and where are there some growth gaps. How that connects then with our mission is that it's really good for a church to not only rely on stories of growth, but also to see numbers. Now, these aren't numbers like financial giving and attendance, but much deeper into discipleship about people's attitudes, people's beliefs, their practices, personally and as a church. You know, just a couple of days ago, one of our discipleship coaches and I were at a church, a fairly large church with about 20 staff, and we were talking with them for a whole day about discipleship. And we've been working with this church for several years, and they've had some recent staff changes and really wanted their staff to get their minds around discipleship again. And it was exciting that I think she was director of children's ministries, said, you know, what we've done in discipleship at our church, like we've started these discipleship focused groups, we call them classes, and we also some mini groups that we call bands. And the parents of our kids are in those groups. And we're seeing a real change in how they parent. And it's been blessing us as children's ministries. In fact, this year, we don't have to ask for volunteers. We're getting more than enough volunteers because these parents who are growing spiritually and are just internally motivated to volunteer. And then someone else said, well, true, but, you know, there's a lot of people in this church I know who the discipleship move really hasn't touched them. Now, which story is the true story? And sometimes in churches you'll get into arguments of which story is the true story. Are we doing well or are we doing poorly? Well, fortunately, this church did a discipleship assessment about 4 years ago, and that was their base level assessment. And in that discipleship assessment, that tells you what percentage of your church is at each of those 4 stages of a disciple's growth. 15% of their congregation was at the Christ-centered stage. That last stage we also call the abiding Christ stage, 15%. And then they retook that assessment 3 years later, just last year, and they showed that no longer were 15% of the congregation at that stage, but 33% were at that stage, over double at that last stage. And I think that's a numerical or a statistical evidence of what that director of children's ministries was saying that she's seeing in the life of their church. Now, they got a long ways to go yet, too. They say there's a lot of people they haven't touched, and the assessment showed where that was the case and actually showed them some things they can do as a church to get this to more people in their congregation. And so that fits with our mission. Not to simply be a coaching ministry. We coach churches, but we are about getting measurable results, getting some numbers that can show you how you're improving and what you need to do next to improve further.
Right. It's very eye-opening. I know from our own engagement with ascending leaders. In fact, we took a little poll of what we thought our results would be before the results were in, and then we in leadership at the church, and then when we got our actual results, we were like, oh, that's not what we thought, because we were going on our personal experience of interacting with members of the church.
Right. And
the larger the church is, the more it's like feeling part of an elephant, and not getting the total picture.
Yep. And that is So I planted and pastored a church for over a decade, and so I kind of know how pastors think, and we pastors we're observant, and we're kind of watching what's going on, and we tend to get a sense of what we feel is going on in discipleship and where the problems are and what we need to do as a church. I remember here at this church, at Chapelwood United Methodist, at that time, Bob Johnson was on staff as executive pastor, and you were part of that team, and that's when ascending leaders first started working with you, and Bob set this grid out in front of everybody, which you're referring to, and said, where do you all think we are? And that grid kind of shows where you are at the very bottom, where your people aren't really doing spiritual practices well themselves, and your church isn't doing well, all the way to the upper right, where personal spiritual practices are great, and the church's activities are great, and then smattering around there. And Bob said that the church, the pastors and the church staff all said, we believe we're here. And when you got the results, what were the results?
We were lower in that left quadrant than we expected.
Yes.
The descriptor word was complacent.
You were complacent. And the complacent is kind of down bottom center of that whole thing. Was not the news you wanted to hear.
No.
But it just shows, too, that just observing and thinking we see, we may be missing things. And so taking an assessment like this actually shows you what's really going on the ground level.
Exactly. And I guess that would be the difference in a church health assessment and a discipleship assessment. Can you explain that? Because pastors and leaders are offered many tools from many different organizations, their own denomination. There's outstanding help for churches. But choosing the right one for your church is really the challenge for pastors and staff to make that right decision. So what's the difference in a church health assessment and a discipleship assessment?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was pastoring, discipleship assessments were not out there yet. And so we used some church health assessments in our church. And I actually became certified in 2 different church health assessments, one in my own denomination, and one was more evangelical. It came out of Europe. And church health assessments are good. They will say, what is the health of your church? And they will often look at 8 or 9 or 10 areas. Usually worship is one area. One of them talked about passionate spirituality, holistic small groups. It might look at finance as another issue, evangelism as an issue. And it'll also look at discipleship. Now, what I've observed, even in the really good church health assessments, the questions they ask about discipleship really aren't all that deep. They give you a kind of a good impression, but it treats it as, discipleship is one of many. Whereas when Christ gave the Great Commission, he didn't say, make sure your finances are in good order.
Right.
He didn't say, while evangelism is critical, and Acts 2 especially talks about that, he didn't say evangelize, first of all.
Right.
He said, make disciples.
Exactly.
And we found in churches, when they make disciples well, these other aspects of church health
will fall in place. Yes.
And so, yes, discipleship assessment, it's a church health assessment too, because it is about your church health. But it focuses on some really good questions about your discipleship, about your attitudes as a person, about your beliefs as a person, about where you're growing, what you're doing. These assessments do not ask opinion questions, or don't ask what you value, or don't ask questions, opinion questions, or what you like, but ask questions about your behavior and about your beliefs. It's all multiple choice, and it really gets down deep into how are your people doing in their spiritual growth.
Yes. I'll just tell a quick story here. The second time that we took the Reveal survey at Chapelwood, at that time, Reveal offered a personal report. So the person who took the survey, if they chose to, could see their responses and give feedback on maybe where they are in their discipleship and what would be a good next step for them. So we set that up and offered, if any church member would like to meet with someone to go over their results, they could. And so I took several of those meetings with people, and it was really great starter for a heartfelt spiritual conversation.
Yeah.
And what I found is the people who, you need to get a certain number of members of your congregation, a certain percentage of your membership to take the survey. And then within that number of people, only a handful wanted to have a meeting with someone to go over their results. And that's fine. We're all like that. And I think that's what you're talking about, church health assessment versus a spiritual discipleship assessment. It's more like, what's the church doing? This is more like, how am I doing?
Yep.
And so in these meetings, what I found was a theme or a common thread was there was a question in there about forgiveness. And the ability to forgive someone who's hurt you or to forgive yourself is a real turning point in a person's discipleship journey.
Yep.
It involves knowing and understanding for yourself the love of God that forgives, and also being able to give the love of God to someone in your life who needs forgiveness. And I just found it fascinating that it sparked that conversation from us putting ourselves in the position to offer this survey for our people. So while a church is gathering good info, they're also able to help members just through taking the survey.
Yes.
Helps an individual member.
Yep. In fact, the Reveal people say that question about forgiveness is probably the telling question about your capacity to love is getting past that forgiveness.
Right.
And the interesting thing with Reveal, it's been around since about 2007. And there was a short period there where they not only analyzed the church, but they would give people analysis of themselves, and you happen to take it your second time when they had that available. Right. And unfortunately, that's no longer, in fact, Reveal is no longer available. But I've got some good news for you.
Okay.
American Bible Society is coming out with a revamp of that original tool, and probably on extra vitamins, because it's a really neat tool. And they're hoping by next spring of 2026, to have that for the individual piece back part of it. So you could do that again, like you did when you had, what did you call them, mentors or next step guides? Or
My Next Step Guide.
My Next Step Guide. And that was a great provision. You didn't have a lot of people take advantage of that, but those you did, just helping them talk through the results and what they might need to do next.
Exactly. Yeah, well, I'm excited about this new tool. I'm very encouraged by the fact that ascending leaders with 20 years experience is able to adapt as tools change. I
Yes.
mean, technology changes.
Yep.
It does in every single home, business, church. And so the ability of ascending leaders to adapt and use a different survey or a revised survey or a survey that's now owned by a different company than
Yep.
it once was, it's a real strength of ascending leaders.
Yeah.
You're not, ascending leaders is not giving up on the value of having measurable results.
That's right. That's a high value for us. It's part of our mission. We want measurable results.
Well, Mike, you've shared some interesting stories already. I'm wondering if you could talk about what are some of the key advantages a church can expect to gain from going through a process with ascending leaders and using a discipleship tool.
Yeah, so using a church-wide discipleship assessment, it allows the church to get an accurate a picture of what's going on in the church in discipleship, what's working, where the people are at, and maybe where there's some gaps. It gives a common language to the leadership of the church around discipleship. It kind of gets everybody on the same page, and then it shows you next steps as a church. Now, each church is unique, and so it shows those uniquenesses and each church's application. And that's basically the next step Ascending Leaders brings is we help churches not just get this report, like sometimes when you get a consultant, they give you this report and you go and it sits on the shelf
Right.
in a binder. Rather, we help the church walk through the results and walk through the steps it takes.
Yes, and I know that you pair up churches with discipleship coaches.
Correct.
Or a discipleship coach to really get to know the pastor, the leadership team,
Yep.
to learn about the church culture.
Yes.
And the coaches walk with them through every step of the way. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and it's really important. Some people think, well, you get the results and then we walk with the church. We actually walk with the church from the beginning of the assessment, taking the assessment. You know, you don't need any more than 50% of your congregation to take the assessment for it to be scientifically valid. However, when we coach churches around some tips for taking it and some things they might do, we regularly get results that are in the 50%, even 60%, even one as much as 70% response.
Wow.
Now, you don't need that to be scientifically valid, but still it gives a lot more affirmation to the congregation who don't know stats and all that kind of stuff to say, hey, 65% of our people are saying this, or 70% of our people are saying this. It just gives them confidence in these results, even though 49% is still scientifically valid. So we start at the very beginning. And then are there for any problems they run into. We've had times where churches run it to say, oh, I got a problem. You know, I don't have enough people. I'm only at 25% who've taken this. And we say, well, you might try this, or how about trying this? What have you done so far? So we can help them, you know, get the strong response rate they want. And then going through the results. Actually, as part of this, most often with churches, when we kick off the assessment, we do a church-wide weekend workshop, and that really kind of gets everybody in the church's mind around discipleship. It's a workshop around discipleship.
That's where that common language starts to come in.
Common language starts coming, and what we found with that, then the church has a sense of what to do with the results, and the people have a sense about it. When they don't do that, sometimes churches take the results and somebody says, oh, yeah, this proves what I always thought was true, and they run off there, you know, into left field with what somebody thought
Right.
was the case. So at the beginning, we walk with them through taking the assessment, then giving the results and applying that to the local church, and then even walking alongside the leadership team for months after that as they start working through this. And you know, when you
Right.
apply some results in a church, you run into curveballs you had not expected. They can actually sometimes kind of sideline
Yes,
the work. I mean, we've
sure.
had some of these here in Houston where
Harvey.
we'll have Hurricane Harvey just throws everybody for a loop for months.
Yes, and that's okay. You just
That's
set that
okay.
aside. What I have found is that through the process in our church, is that because you need a large number of people or percentage of people to take the assessment, then when the resulting discipleship plan or pathway or suggestions, you know, come through, there's a connection already. People
Yep.
say, oh, I took that survey, and now in our case, it's called My Next Step Ministry. When My Next Step Ministry begins to be apparent through signage at the church, through our website, through the pastor talking about it from the pulpit. People know, oh, this is why we now have My Next Step. I took that survey, someone listened, and this is tailored to our church and our congregation.
Yep.
And I think that it helps a lot. And that kind of leads me to thinking about another church that I know that you've worked with, which is Solana Beach Presbyterian Church in the San Diego area in California. And I love what their outcome, what their spiritual practice was that came out. But I don't want to get ahead of the story and give it away. Could you tell us about some of their outcomes and the experience they've had working with ascending leaders?
Yeah, Solana Beach Presbyterian Church, SBPC, they affectionately call it, was a church that had already done a lot of right things. They had sermon-based small groups. We really encourage that. Often that's a good step for churches to take. They were providing questions for those small groups. They were providing some exercises in those, some spiritual formation exercises with that. And in spite of all that, and they felt like they were doing very well, but they wanted to see what was going on with discipleship. And so they took a discipleship assessment. They took the Reveal assessment. And of all these kind of types of churches, there's like 9 types of churches that you can come out as, they came at the lowest.
Oh, gosh.
I still remember the morning. I think it was May 24, 2019, when I stood up in front of over 100 leaders, and I had to tell them, your result is that you're troubled.
Oh.
And I had some very angry people in the room. But thankfully, God worked through that. And the way he worked through that there was with a senior pastor saying, what these results say is that we're doing a lot of right things, but us as leadership have not applied this to our own lives and really grown as disciples. And I'm taking the first one to take ownership, that we need to take ownership of our spiritual growth. And they did that. And they did a lot of other change, a number of other changes too. 2 years later, they took it again, and they had gone from the very lowest to a very high place. And then 2 years later, they took it again, and they ended up being an energized congregation. In the last year, they've gone from a senior pastor who was there 23 years to the next senior pastor. He retired. They go to the next senior pastor, and that's often a very difficult place for the church. And the next senior pastor, when he saw the profile of the church, it was all about discipleship, and he thought there must be a couple influencers on that search team that made that so prominent. He asked every person on the search team, and they all said, discipleship is critical to who we are and to what we do. We do not need a pastor who's going to change that. We need a pastor who's going to take us to the next level with this.
Well, and changing culture is very difficult.
It takes years.
It does, and that's a good example of a church that stuck with it.
Yep, they did. That was like 6 or 7 years. Usually they say it's 7 to 9 years to change culture. And so it'll be really exciting to see what they do in the next 2 or 3 years. They're well on their way, if not arrived, at making a deep culture change. And we've seen small churches take deep culture change too. It's possible.
Oh, it is possible.
But these assessments kind of show you how you're doing.
Right.
And so I know some churches that said, oh, yeah, we did that on assessment years and years ago. It probably didn't go very far if you didn't come back and try it again. And it can be really like you did. You took it a second time.
We did.
And it really showed some significant growth on your part in discipleship.
Yes, and being patient to continue to apply the My Next Step in our case. In Solana Beach, I love they had 15 minutes in my favorite chair with Jesus. 15 minutes in your favorite chair
is what the pastor, in his early days as a pastor, he was in middle school ministry. He says, it feels like we've gone back to middle school with this 50, but it was very clear, just spend 15 minutes a day in your favorite chair. And, one elderly lady pulled him aside and said, I got a problem with this. I can't do 15 minutes. It's ending up to be 40 minutes.
It's taking over my day.
And that's a great problem to have.
Right.
Yeah. And there's other churches that we've worked with too that have really shown good results by taking the assessment again 2 to 3 to 4 years later and saying, okay, because of all this work we've done now, how are we doing now? And showing the improvement, and then also showing what some next steps might be.
Well, starting with an assessment eliminates, in my experience, a cookie cutter approach.
Yes.
You cannot use a cookie cutter discipleship plan that Ascending Leaders has created for a church. When you start with an assessment, then you start with the real needs and the real successes of a congregation and go from there.
Yep. That's why we are not a curriculum ministry. There's some great curriculums out there that churches can use, a variety of great curriculums. There's even whole programs that churches can use. We're not a program ministry. We tailor it to the needs of local churches. Each church is unique. Each church has its own story, been through a lot, and has its own needs of what it needs to do to become a church that is discipling well. A church with a Christ-centered culture of discipleship.
Mm-hmm. And the assessment itself, the Reveal assessment, which it changed through the years since its inception, and you know the history very well. The fact that it came out of Willow Creek Church and led to them saying, well, we're not as healthy as we thought we were either. I just love that origin story. You can tell us a little bit more about it. Such a tremendous,
and I wasn't there, so I'm only telling you the stories that people who were there told me. I was there, though, for their leadership retreats at Willow Creek Church back in the early 90s when I was pastoring. And the leaders of the retreat would often say, look at the people volunteering here. Look at that person vacuuming. That's not a hired hand to vacuum. That is a person who's volunteering a couple hours vacuuming. You see people volunteering around here because they're spiritually mature. And their executive pastor, Greg Hawkins, said, we say that, but we have no evidence that's true. And so they got the best of the best to create for them an assessment. And around, I think it was 2004, maybe 2005, they assessed their congregation, and they found there was no evidence that there was a connection between your activity as a volunteer and your spiritual maturity. What they found rather is that there are these 4 stages of a disciple's growth based on how somebody related to Jesus. So their first one was exploring Christ. Their second one was growing in Christ. The third was close to Christ. And the fourth was Christ-centered. Now when they went public with this in 2008, Ascending Leaders had already been around for 3 years, and we were a curriculum ministry at that time, and our curriculum was a deeper discipleship model in churches. And we were finding that in churches, there'd be a group of people who really wanted that curriculum, and we had great success with that group, but we had difficulty getting more to want this in churches. And when we read these results from Reveal, that's it. Right. That's it. How do you get people from growing in Christ to Christ-centered? There's that close to Christ in between, and we got to take them one step at a time. And that's how we became a coaching ministry. But I've went to the Willow Creek people, and I said, thank you for taking your great abilities at marketing and these things like A.B. Bruce from the late 1800s and Bill Hull, his ideas around these stages and making that, that available to everybody. They said, A.B. who? Bill who? We just did a survey, and we just asked, what's your adjectives about your relationship with Christ? And this is what we came up with. Wow.
So they'd found a modern response to an ancient Christian phenomenon of how people grow closer to Christ through their lives. And in addition to Bruce and Hull, there's many others who have, just shown this pathway. I love that the spiritual principle is true through the ages.
It is true through the ages. And so we are Ascending Leaders. We are about measurable results. And so we are so grateful for what Willow Creek first and then the Willow Creek Association did. In 2008, they opened this to other churches, and there were thousands of churches that took this around the United States and around the world. And then it kind of spun off from the Willow Creek Association, and another organization owned it. And at that time also kind of gave a baby brother was born called Renovo. And so both Renovo and Reveal were doing this. A couple of years ago, Reveal went off the market. It's expensive to keep these things going. Renovo's still around, and we've been using Renovo. But we're excited that the American Bible Society has taken all that work from Reveal, all that work from Renovo, has pulled it together and added some new elements, especially about Bible engagement and people's flourishing. And they're soon to come out with a new tool. It's kind of like the early Reveal with a lot of vitamins, because it's so much more. And it is called Next Step for Churches. It's from American Bible Society. It's coming out. We've seen the what it's going to look like. It has a report that is both simple enough for your average person to understand, but also you can tap on it and dig deeper into what these different percentages mean about it. So it's a pretty incredible tool. It is coming out natively in both English and Spanish.
Great.
So none of the others were like that, that it is natively in Spanish and can be taken in Spanish as well as English. It has a lot of other great features about it. We certainly are going to be using that tool with ascending leaders.
Good. That will help so many people to have it available in both languages.
Yes, so many more churches.
I assume that data is still there, all that compiled data to use for their statistical averages and means. And
yep.
Good.
They're using all that data. I mean, it's thousands upon thousands of churches,
right.
And then hundreds of thousands of individuals that have been part of this. All of that data these last 18 years is coming together. 2,500 churches and 400,000 individuals are in the database.
Yes, so measurable results.
Measurable results, and it's measured.
Well, that leads me to they're innovating with product, and so is Ascending Leaders.
Yes.
So we have a new product on the market.
Yes.
That's going to help churches that maybe want a quicker outcome or a quicker engagement than going through our full coaching model.
Right.
So could you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's called Disciple Scan. And these discipleship assessments that we use are like 100 questions. Disciple Scan is only 11 questions. It's short, it's brief, but it gets at the core of being a discipling church. And rather than doing the work to get your whole congregation to take an assessment, it's just with the core of your leaders.
Okay.
So you get anywhere from 5 to 10 leaders together for 90 minutes. They all have their own devices, and they will answer these 11 questions, and it will give immediate response based on how they answered it with the coach present by Zoom, actually. And so it gives you just a real high-level assessment, discipleship assessment. But it's not going to your whole congregation. It's just 5 to 10 leaders in a room together just for 90 minutes. That's all it is. But gives you really good results. And then we come out with a report later that we give to the pastor of the next steps you might want to take. So it's much less costly. It's quick. It's still a quality tool, and gives you a sense of where you need to go. We also do some teaching as part of that.
Right.
So you get some common language around discipleship that can help a church.
Well, I'm glad that we're offering a variety of tools and ways to engage with ascending leaders that suits each church.
Yes, that's right. Disciple Scan is a great way to take a first step to get started. It can also be for a church that's maybe done one of these deeper assessments, and they say, before we do the next one, we just want to get a sense of where we are, so let's just have our leaders together to test out where we are.
So both for new users and repeat users.
It can be repeat users that do it in between some of the big assessments.
Okay.
But we just really are hearing from churches what they're needing. And a lot of churches were asking, what's just a small, simple step? And this is the Disciple Scan is that. Okay.
Well, wonderful. People want something a little bit quicker and easier these days in a complicated world.
Yes, our world is very complicated. And with the help of some AI, we developed a tool that we've been trying to develop for the last 5 years. And us humans were not able to do what we wanted to do. So AI helped us, and we created this tool. It's a fantastic tool, Disciple Scan.
Great. Well, Mike, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. You always know the latest cutting edge tools available in this space, this ministry space that Ascending Leaders is called to, and it's an exciting time in the life of the organization. So thank you for sharing with us.
You're welcome. I'm so glad to share about this topic.
Well, thank you everyone who joined our discipleship dialogue today. You can find this one and many more on our YouTube and Vimeo channels, as well as on our website at ascendingleaders.org. We hope you will connect with us online or in person and take that next step for your church and your discipleship journey by working with a discipleship coach, an assessment tool with Mike Johnson, to explore discipleship in your church at a deeper level, something that you can measure and take away that will really help your congregation. Have a blessed day.